All right, so welcome back. Just to kind of give you a reminder where we're at, we finished almost all of the gameplay framework setup that we need to do, and we got ourselves to a point where we're actually able to store a score variable as we collide with these spinny boxes, tacos here, and display that to the console. So we know we're saving our score. We're getting in and increasing that every single time that we run over one of those or collide with it. So in this video, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about creating a more interesting kind of display for the user to see what their score is, so that we're able to begin to learn how to work with user interfaces here. So let's go ahead in the content folder, right click, make a new folder. Let's call this interfaces, and we're going to make an interface. So you right click here. Normally we go to blueprint class, but in this case, you're leveling up and we're going to do some advanced asset creation here, and that happens to be underneath user interface, and you go to widget blueprints. Select that, and I'll usually prepend with a W for widget, and then let's set a HUD, or heads up display, and double click this, and this will open Slate, which is Unreal Engine's UI authoring tool here. This won't be a complete tutorial walking you through what every single thing here does, but it'll be enough that I think you'll be pretty comfortable by the end of this creating basic 2D user interfaces that sit on top of the view that the player has through their camera. So what we can do to start is looking up here in the upper left, we have a couple of, well, more than a couple of common kind of things that we can add, like border, buttons, checkboxes, yada yada. And let's step back here and think about what our goals are going to be. So let's pull up Paint here. So I want to create something kind of simple, fairly simple. So let's say this is our user interface here, and then I'm kind of really easy. I just want to basically take this user interface, and I want to have a little bar at the top. Here, and then I'm gonna say something like, I don't know, I definitely want to show my score, so I might have something like score. Let's hope it looks a little better than that. Score. And then I want to show my score, like 10, right? However many tacos I picked up. So that's, I guess, what I definitely know I want to have that, right? So that's going to be our goal. We want to have a horizontal bar across the top, and we want that to also always change no matter what our screen size is. So if we find ourselves like in a situation where this, the player is playing this on a really teeny little monitor like this, we want everything to be able to be resized, right? So we would want the same bar here and the text that's inside of it and all that stuff to come along for the ride and still be there, right? So that's kind of this, progressive scaling that the engine will do for us, right? So with that said, let's talk about it. And so this canvas will resize automatically depending on the screen that the person has. In fact, if you click this little kind of 2 diagonal arrows here, which says DPI scale, you can actually kind of see a certain common dots per inch or certain common resolutions. And 1280 by 720 is a very common one for like mid-range, very mid-range displays. So let's go ahead and canvas panel. Let's actually do something here that's a little more advanced. I've already opened up the panel hierarchy here. I'm going to scroll down and vertical box, right? So a vertical box widget is a layout panel allowing child widgets to be automatically laid out vertically. And so what we're making here is, you add widgets to this. So it's a widget, and widget has a widget inside of it. Kind of a lazy name, but either way, what we have is a vertical box, and we want to add this to our hierarchy here. So adding it to our hierarchy, you just drag it and lower it there, and you can kind of see that it's hierarchically placed. Canvas is the top end of the hierarchy, right? So we have this vertical box, and it's kind of all the way up here. which is not what we want. If you recall, what we're trying to go for here is we're trying to go for this, this thing that's stretched all the way across. And so this is not looking too good here. So what we want to do in the right-hand side here, where it says anchors, is we can choose our anchors, and then here are some of the options that we have. And you notice at the bottom it says hold shift to update the alignment to match, hold control to update the position to match. And so I'll hold control here and click on that here, right over here. And you notice that it's gone ahead and it's taken this alignment and it's stretched it across, which is exactly what we want. And so that's our vertical anchor. And the size in the y-axis is a little small. So if I increase this, you can see it kind of moves. I think I'm going to have it be about 50 pixels. Well, exactly 50 pixels. And I kind of highlighted this in a different color here. So I'd like it to be, stand out. Well, stand out in the sense that I actually want a black background. So the vertical box, we do not have the option to add any color. So if we're looking here in the details panel, we don't see anything that's giving us any kind of indication that we can add color to it. So what we want to do to add color is we can use this kind of top one here, that's the border. So a border is a container widget that can contain one child widget, providing opportunities around it with a background image and adjustable padding. You can also do a background color, which is what we're going to want. And so what I want to do here is drag and drop this border here. So if I drag the border, it's now, you notice it's now a child of the vertical box, which is what we want. And then over here on the right with the border selected, you get some different options, right? So we don't have that prior option about anchoring, but we do have one that says size, and it says auto, and it says fill. We're going to say fill. And that just went ahead and filled that whole background, and it filled it with the color that we happen to have. So something that trips people up and trips me up all the time. So I want to change the color to black. And if I look here, I see content, color, and opacity, and I think, oh, okay, cool. That's what I'm going to do. And I click that, and I start dragging, and I'm like, wait, I don't see any colors changing at all. Because that's not what we want to select here. That happens to do with the content that's inside of this particular border here. We want to look under appearance where it says brush and then brush color. And so for me, again, I'm really boring, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this to black, and we notice it changed to black. You could almost make any color you want, but for me, it's going to be black. All right, so I say okay, it looks good. There, I've got this border, but if we go back to our design doc here, we see that we want to have the word score, and then we want to be able to show the score directly after that. So for that, we want to add some text. So I could just go ahead and drag text directly in there, and you notice it'll even kind of snap to where it knows it needs to be. But I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of overkill for this because, it's potential, well, it's not potentially, we're going to have more stuff that we want to display at the top of this screen, like a timer, maybe a taco count, like other sorts of information for the player as they go along. And so to do that, I wouldn't want to just throw text in here because then it makes it very difficult. If I want to put more text in, I'm kind of stuck, right? I mean, I can do it, but I can't, I'd have to put it somewhere else. Because remember, if we look over our border, it says here, contain one child widget. And in this case, we're taking it up with the word text block, or we could say score. But even if we do that, we've got no place to display the score inside of this. It'll be stuck. So we need to go ahead and delete that. I need to add, in our case, I'm going to add a different type of box, horizontal box. It says allows widgets to be laid out in a flow horizontally. And so that sounds cool. I'm going to drag and drop that under the border. So now I'm kind of doing this inception thing where it says it can accept one child, but then this one child, of course, can accept other children. In our particular case, it's a horizontal box. So now that I have the horizontal box here, it's going to enable me to lay things out along the top of this this little bar here horizontally. And the first thing I want to lay out, and I'm going to click text, drag it, and just kind of drop it underneath here. And you notice it'll snap over to the left. And this text instead of calling it text block, if I look in the selected here, I look in the content, text block is not what I want to say. I want to say score. Okay, and I'll click out, and now let's go ahead and look. All right, I think it looks better. Right, so we need one text box for score, but we need another text box that's going to display the score. In that case, we don't want it to be displayed numerically, but either way, as far as the engine is concerned, it's going to be another text box. So if I take this text, I can actually just kind of drag it here directly where I want to put it, and it says text block. And for now, I'm going to put 0. Okay. So before we jump into kind of the making this, the data source of the 0 be the score variable from our player state, which is what we are going to do, let's just kind of take a look at the layout here. So score is kind of very close to the edge of the screen. I don't like that. I want to add a little bit of padding. So if you select this, in the right-hand side here, you can decide what your padding is going to be. And it's just, in our case, I think maybe 10 pixels from the left. That's good. Same thing with the score. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to add another 10 pixels of padding to it. I almost kind of want to add some padding to the top too, but then I need to make this bottom part. Okay, yeah. So let's go ahead and do our vertical box. I said 50, but I want to say 75. Yeah, that's better. And then that gives us a little bit more room in score here to show you a couple other things like horizontal alignment and vertical alignment. So with vertical alignment, we want to vertically align this to the center, which is there. And then we can take that top padding and make it back to 0, and then we have something center. And then the same thing here, vertically aligned to center for the score. And that looks better. All right, so are we done? Not totally. So the last thing we want to do is, well, not the last, but the last thing we want to do within this particular viewport here is we don't just want to show 0. In fact, we want to show whatever value happens to exist in our player state. And so to do that, in the details, you can bind quite a few values or variables here, like depending on what you want to do. So in this kind of context, I want to take the text value here, and when my score is 10, I want it to be 10, and when my score is 0, I want it to be 0. So if you see this little button here that says bind, you can select that and you can say create binding. And what this will do is we'll hop over to from the designer here in the upper right to this graph editing mode, and it will make a function for us. So if we look up here in the tabs, we have the event graph, and this kind of looks similar to blueprints. We even have a tick, and we have something called construct and pre-construct. But we have something we haven't seen before, and that's functions. And we're going to actually deal with some functions because our blueprints are starting to get a little bit messy, and having functions essentially enables us to package up a particular action or function, if you will, that we want to be able to use many times, and just say calling that instead of recreating nodes and various things over and over again. So this is called getText0, and that's not actually a good name. I'm going to rename it. So if I hit F2 with the function name selected, I can say this is going to be getScore. So this function will get our score and return it. And so the function will enter here whenever we call getScore, which happens to be now bound to that text. And then it will return a text value. And right now that's empty, but if we were to change this text value to, well, whatever we want, something like 12, and we compiled that, and it would say 12 instead. It wouldn't say 12 in our designer. It would still say whatever we said it would say, but when we actually add this interface to our game, it's going to return that. Fantastic. So, I mean, we can stay in here. I was about to jump over and show you how to add the interface to a particular view, but I think let's finish this up. So we've done this before. We need to get the score. So in order to do so, we need to, you guessed it, we need to cast, or maybe you didn't, but either way, we want to cast to our player state, which is right here. And when we cast to the player state, we know we're going to want to get our player score, right? So we get our player score, and then that's what we want to show. So sometimes it's useful just to do that part here, and then if we remember, and if we don't, we can kind of go over and look and say, oh, what did we do? How did we get the player score? You know, in a prior life here, and we did it through our player character, right? And we did it like this. We took the player controller, and then we had the player state, and then we used that as the object here. So we can do the same thing here. If we right click somewhere out here in the blank area, and I'm back in my heads up display, just so you know, and we get our player controller, and then from there we say what's our player state. Excellent. And then we can plug that in. And so that's essentially exactly the same as what we're doing here in order to cast. So we know it's going to work. So if I compile that, we get a nice green check mark, and that's it. So that's all we need to do to grab that variable that's sitting in our player state blueprint. And so we can actually go ahead, if we go back to Designer, it looks fine to me. If you wanted to tweak things, you can change the color, of the score, and I don't know, make it like kind of pinky red like that. That's fine. Better than white. All right, and then just close this. So the last thing I want to show you here is if we play, there's nothing new. You notice we should have, at the top of our screen, we should have that black HUD that we just designed. So we need to add this. And so the way that this is done is, it depends. Like there's many different places you can add it. In my case, because we know what the player controller is, but if we double click this, it's not really doing anything. I mean, it's around because we know we wanted to I wanted to show you guys a more kind of complete gameplay framework, but we're not using it. We will. And I think the place we're going to use it is to manage some of the UI, because the player itself, we might want to take the player character out of the game at times, right? But we don't want to necessarily take any of our UI elements, including the HUD, out. We may want that to follow the player around, or we may want to, show a game over screen and the player is gone, or something. So I think putting the UI within the player controller is probably, for my taste, it's okay, and it lets us use it a little bit. So I'm in the player controller blueprint here, in the event graph, and there's nothing. So what I want to do is, once the player's in the game, I want to basically show that UI, that heads-up display that we just made. So let's use this. I think it's called begin play. In fact, I know it is. Let's use this event. Wow, I'm really zoomed out. So event begin play. We know what that's going to do the second that we press the play button, and if that character, that player controller is present in the world, whatever we have kind of coming out of this node is going to fire. And so what I want to use, and it happens to be called create widget. So what we made, that UI, is called a widget. And so create widget, this is construct none. And there's class. And if we try to select class, we're going to see like what we have available. And ignore user widget. What we have is this w_HUD, which is what we made. And so we're going to create one of those. And something else that I like to do, again, especially with widgets, is I want to promote that to a variable. So if you right-click here on the little purple circle, you right-click, you can choose to promote to variable, and then let's name it. Let's just name it HUD, right? HUD. Owning player, the player controller object that references the owning player. I mean, I think we might even be able to do self. Let's try to compile. That's great. So that also works well. Okay, So we're creating this widget. Now what we need to do is add it to our viewport. So it's called add to viewport. So that's another function here, and it takes in, well, it takes in a user widget. So that happens to be this thing we just created here. So we can take the value that's getting returned out and plug that in here. And so really that's like at the most basic level, it's all we have to do. Specifically with this heads-up display. With other UI elements that we create, like menus, we're going to have to do a couple more things, including telling the engine that, okay, now we want to, give control back to the mouse, right? So instead of just allowing control to go through input or the game itself, we want to now say, okay, let's take the player's mouse and let them do stuff like click on menu items. But for our purposes, and let's comment this, creates our heads-up display. We'll do HUD and compile that. So for our purposes, if all works, when we press play, we should see that user interface that we made stretch across our screen. Play, and I do, right? So I'm going to press F11 here and go full screen, and then move around. Okay, so not only did we get our score showing, but if you recall, we also made a binding. So right now our score, this little 0 should actually go up by 1 when I run over one of my spinny tacos here. So are we ready? Let's do it. And it works, right? It's very cool. So 1, 2, 3. And so once we've done that, I mean, definitely congratulations, because I think you're starting to see kind of how games are made, or at least how some games like this are made in some of these, in a game engine like Unreal. The last thing I want to do is I had this print screen coming up in the console. And I think now that we've got a heads-up display, we don't need it. Okay, so this will shorten our blueprint a little bit. So I went to my player character and removed that. Okay. So in the next couple of videos, I think we're going, so now that we have a little bit of a flavor for how do you create a UI, in the next 2 videos, I think what I want to do is a little more playtesting. So if you recall, we had a particular element or game mechanic that when you ate a taco, you would gain some mass and you would slow down, and that was something that sounds very cool, but we haven't actually implemented it yet. And I think we have pretty much all the tools to be able to play test that in our sandbox level. So until next time, thank you.